welcome back to another episode of Yoga Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Waycott. It has been quite a week in my life. I feel like it's been one of those weeks where everything goes wrong all at once. I'm being kind of dramatic, but my phone and my laptop broke on the same day this week for like completely unrelated reasons. And I'm like, man, even yoga teachers need tech to like get by these days and do our jobs. And I ended up having to like unexpectedly go get a new phone. And thankfully I was able to back up like quite a bit of, the things that were important on my the phone that I had before. But my laptop is currently hanging on by a thread. It has literally like decapitated itself, and like the screen and the keyboard have tried to separate themselves from each other. And anyways, it was one of those weeks, one of those weird weeks. But yeah, I'm back in the recording studio. I have Waylon with me. If you're watching on YouTube, he's like underneath the desk right now, and you can't see him, but you might be able to hear him. He is getting older. He's like officially a senior dog now. And I feel like the older Waylon gets, the more he's like grunting and just like making weird sounds all the time. So if you hear Waylon, I apologize for him. And yeah, we're in the thick of fall here in like southern British Columbia where I live. And as I get older, I'm definitely more of a sunshine person, and I would rather step outside into like warm, comfortable weather than, being lashed with wind and rain. And, I grew up like around this part of the world, but for some reason, I don't know, I never get used to it. And, now that we're in the middle of fall, like we're also in Q4, kind of like wrapping up the end of the year. And I feel like this is when I start to look ahead towards what I want 2026 to look like in terms of teaching and, my teaching calendar. And I try my best to plan out my year in advance, like not, perfectly, like everything is set in stone, but I do like to look at the year as a whole and kind of plan out especially the bigger things. Like if I know that I'm going to be running a 200-hour training or like some, bigger continuing ed, like things that are going to take more energy from me, I definitely like to have those on the calendar ahead of time just so that I can see things. And, it helps keep me grounded in my bigger vision to make sure that I'm always teaching from a place that's really intentional, really focused on education, and never from a place of scarcity or like reactivity. So yeah, I'm definitely in that part of the year where I'm like, looking out into the future to 2026. And I like planning ahead too. It helps me kind of protect my energy and gives me some direction moving forward. And last week I was in Vancouver visiting a dear friend of mine. And before I went to see my friend, I stopped by to catch a yoga class at a studio that I have been visiting for years, for classes and workshops and whatnot. And they have a new space now. And so I went and I took a class with a teacher that I've never practiced with before. And, it felt good. I was practicing in a community that, I'm familiar with. I have some connections there, but I'm definitely not like part of that community. And one of the things I like about that is that when you've taught yoga for a long time, it feels really good to just like be anonymous and kind of roll into, a studio where like nobody knows you, nobody knows you're a teacher, and you can just kind of show up and receive. And so anyways, it's been a week. It's been a week over here, but I'm happy to be back. And, I've been thinking about how like teaching yoga and, holding space for other people is such energetic work. And when we're teaching yoga teacher trainings, like, we try so hard to prepare students for what to expect when you actually like begin teaching in the real world. But there are some aspects of teaching that you really just like, you don't know until you're there, right? And one of those things is like the energetic toll that teaching yoga can take. And when I was a new yoga teacher, hands-on assists were still very common, like in the part of the world that I teach in. And this was back before like the resurgence of the Me Too movement. This was before, like right before, I would say, we started to see more mainstream conversations about consent like happening in the yoga industry. This was like just on the cusp before all of that started to happen. And so when I was a brand new yoga teacher, like I was taught to offer hands-on assists, and I went around and, would offer assists during class and near the end of class. And I remember so clearly how much I didn't realize that I was like taking on other people's energy when I was going around and touching them during class. And I would move around assisting everyone. And after teaching, I would always feel quite depleted, like when I was a new teacher. And I think part of that was because like, I didn't have the command of the room that I have now. I didn't know how to like hold boundaries, hold my own energy, detach myself from like other people and their stuff that they bring into the room. And I think from the outside, for people who don't know me very well, I can come across a little bit intense or serious, or like I'm not like super easily bothered by things. And that's probably my Scorpio rising coming through. But the reality is that I'm actually like a pretty sensitive person, and I'm quite tuned in to like noticing how people are feeling and, picking up on things that feel off. And yeah, I picked up on a lot, especially as a new yoga teacher. And I think that students also picked up on the fact that I was picking up on a lot. And I feel like that gets you into the territory where you start to encounter what we sometimes call like energy vampires, and people who just kind of want to come and like suck the life out of you. And so there were times when I was a new teacher where students would just like latch onto me and corner me like in the back of the classroom after class, and they would want to start doing like emotional processing, or they would start trauma dumping about, something that was going on in their life at the time. And, they were looking for advice because maybe I seemed like, a sensitive person who was paying attention to them. And I was like barely even 19 years old. Like they should not have been asking me for any kind of life advice. But they were, and they were kind of like projecting that role onto me. And when I was new, like I didn't know how to protect myself energetically. And I think also because I was so young, like I didn't have the skills yet to like kind of gracefully exit those conversations in the way that I'm able to now. And, it's been like a learning journey for me to be able to develop the skills to like take care of my own energy and still be, respectful and compassionate towards other people and what they're going through. And so in today's episode, I want to talk about some of the things that I like to do to maintain my own energy as a yoga teacher so that the work that I'm doing feels sustainable. So when I think about this, I like to think about practices that fill my cup to start out with. So these are kind of like my non-negotiable things that I have to do. Rules created by myself, arbitrary rules. But these are like the non-negotiable things that I have to do either like throughout the week or, monthly, to really just make sure that I'm showing up to teach from like a grounded and whole place. And, you know, I love all kinds of body work. And I think that body work is really important for yoga teachers. Like, you've got to find whatever it is that you like, you know, if it's massage or chiro or something more energetic like Reiki. I think that it's really important that like we take care of our physical vessels, our minds, our emotions, just because like we've got to be strong to show up and do this work. And so for me, I absolutely love acupuncture. And acupuncture has been such a transformative form of support for me as a yoga teacher. I tried acupuncture like years and years ago, maybe once or twice, and I thought that I didn't like it. I thought that it didn't work, that it didn't do anything. But I realized that I just hadn't found the right acupuncturist yet. And so about 5 years ago now, I found my acupuncturist. And I'm so grateful to have her in my life. She's turned into a dear friend of mine. She's also an Ayurveda counselor, and she teaches the Ayurveda module in my 200-hour yoga teacher trainings. And her and I like collaborate on workshops and so many things. Like, she's so special to me. But I am so thankful to have acupuncture in my life. It has been a like monthly non-negotiable for me for years. And I just feel like it really recalibrates your whole system, like body, mind, spirit. You know, you think you're going into acupuncture for something specific, like, oh, I have a headache or my shoulder hurts or whatever. And then afterwards, you realize that like all these other things, you know, feel better as well. And it's so subtle, but it's also like a treatment that's cumulative. So it's like the more you go to acupuncture over time, the quicker your body like responds and knows what to do. And so I just feel like it's such a good ritual for me. And I think most importantly, it's something that forces me to like really receive, because acupuncture is quite vulnerable. Like, you're literally, you know, lying there with your clothes off on a table and you're covered in needles and you can't move. And so like you're forced to surrender, you're forced to relax. And even though we think of teaching yoga as something that's like so relaxing and so peaceful, when you're the one holding space and you're the one in charge of the room, like you're doing a lot of decision making, right? And you're in charge of what's happening. And acupuncture is like just so yin. It's so good. It's so good for me. So yeah, that's like one of the big like non-negotiables that really, really helps me manage just like all aspects of myself. And then the other thing in terms of just like filling my own cup is making sure that I'm scheduling like non-yoga related exercise into my week. And I love going to group fitness classes. I love being taught by somebody else and like just being a student and not holding space for anyone. And I love yoga, but I also don't believe that yoga is a complete movement practice. And I think that, you know, we need other movement modalities to like stay strong and stay moving well. Like, yoga's not perfect. And so I usually like to sit down on like a Sunday night and look at my calendar and book myself like a few spin classes and a few strength training classes, just to make sure that like I've got those on the calendar. It's non-negotiable. I'm signed up. I have to go. I have to show up. And yeah, I just find that like, you know, engaging in other forms of movement outside of yoga is really, really supportive to me. And I try to get to those classes every week, and it just keeps me feeling motivated and energized and like ready to teach. And I also love connecting with other instructors, like other, you know, fitness instructors who teach different movement modalities, because there are always parallels in their work. And, you know, I often get inspired too by like exercises that they share or themes that they share. Yeah. So like having a fitness routine outside of yoga really, really important to me. It just like supports me in all aspects of my life. And also making sure that I'm receiving monthly body work is really, really important. And I'll just add that, like, if receiving body work like isn't in your budget, or you don't have, extended health benefits or something like that, like you can always work out a trade with someone. Like if you have a friend who's a body worker, maybe you trade them a private yoga class for like a massage once a month and you guys can help each other out. That is totally something that I've done in the past. So those first two things are like my bare minimum energy management practices. And they are what help sustain me just like on a regular basis, week to week. But I do find that there are some types of teaching that require different energy management techniques. So like different types of teaching are going to draw on different parts of us. And the energetic cost at the end of it isn't always the same. When I teach my regular weekly classes, I pretty much always feel grounded and like relaxed, 10 times better leaving than when I showed up. Sometimes it's even like a euphoric feeling afterwards. Like I feel so good after teaching my regular weekly classes. But teaching full weekends of yoga teacher training, so sometimes I'm teaching like 3 days in a row, long days, and often I'm the only teacher in the room for like those 3 days. I find that that's like a totally different type of teaching output. And the way that I feel at the end of the weekend is completely different from how I feel after teaching just a regular weekly class. And because of that, because my cup is actually not full at the end of holding space for a training weekend, I have to manage my energy differently afterwards. And part of the reason is like when you are in a teacher training environment, there is so much vulnerability. There's also sometimes a little bit more like attachment or projection or expectation coming from people. And like people are going through, I want to say like such big emotions over such a small amount of time. Like they're learning to teach. That takes so much courage. They're making mistakes in front of people in public, right? Which is super humbling, especially for us as adults. Usually you're good, like you're used to being good at things, you're used to being like proficient at your job, and then like suddenly you're learning from something from scratch and you don't feel like you were the best at it, and that can be really, really humbling. So people are like experiencing huge emotions, all weekend, and as the teacher, you have to be so rock solid for those people, right? Like you've got to hold it down energetically for them. And then you also have to be so mentally on and like available to answer people's questions and just be like ready for anything at any moment. And so I find that after those days of teaching trainings or those weekends of teaching trainings, I really need something to like discharge that mental energy, especially, and kind of wipe the slate clean so that I don't take all of those feelings and all of those emotions with me like back home for the rest of the week. And I find that the thing that works best for me is incredibly simple. And it is that in the evening when I get home, I grab my dog, Waylon, and I take him for a walk at night. And I am very grateful to live in a place where walking at night is relatively safe. I've certainly lived in places before where that is not the case. And I find that the cold air on my face at nighttime is like so calming for me. And what's interesting is that from an Ayurvedic perspective, learning environments are quite pitta in nature. Like there's a real fiery element to like learning. And there's a lot of mental sharpness and mental energy that's required in those environments. And I feel like by the end of the weekend, my mind feels kind of hot and like kind of intense. And it's just so funny, like being outside in like the darkness and the cold air and like moving, that momentum that you get. Maybe there's a little bit of moonlight. It just like cools me down on every level. And that has become my little ritual. Like every night after yoga teacher trainings, or even after like, I don't know, hosting a workshop, or even like helping out with like a 1-day training with someone, I still feel like I need to go do that little ritual afterwards. And I always say like, your rituals don't have to be complex. They don't have to be elaborate or fancy. It's just like, it's something that creates a clear separation between, being the teacher in the classroom, being the person who's holding space for everyone, and then returning home to like your householder duties and the rest of your life. And I find that doing that just really helps me keep my energy clean and it keeps me feeling good. So every time I do this, I sleep better, I wake up feeling more refreshed afterwards, and it just helps me reset as well so that I can show up the next day to teach with energy that feels clean, right? And this is part of like energetic hygiene for us as yoga teachers. Another really big piece of like energy management is being mindful of your boundaries and like the energy and the attention that you give to people before and after class, especially if you are teaching like lots of classes every week. I feel like you've got to be really, really mindful of this. And as yoga teachers, we're responsible for the energy that we bring into the room. And there's probably going to be some days where like maybe you've had a really busy day at work, it's been stressful. You don't have time to do some kind of like elaborate ritual to calm yourself. You don't have time to go, do a full yoga nidra practice or something like that. And like you're rushing from one place to the next. You show up to teach and like maybe all you have is like 3 minutes to yourself in the studio space to like ground before you start teaching. And there's some days where you might really need that quiet time, even if it's just a minute or two, to settle yourself before somebody comes into the space. I'm just drinking my ginger tea if you're watching on YouTube. And I just want to say that like it's completely okay to close the door, to lock the door, to take just those couple of minutes to yourself before class to breathe and like arrive in your own body. And you probably have some students who like to show up really, really early to class. And if that's the case, if you need that time to yourself, it's perfectly okay to kindly let them know, like, I'm just setting up right now. I'll open the door as soon as I'm ready for you. Like, you get to decide when you let people in, and that little moment that you take to center yourself can really make a massive difference in how you feel, rather than not taking it and then just letting people, instantly come in and start talking to you. And I feel like after class as well, kind of holding on to similar boundaries can be really important for managing your energy and staying grounded. And in my weekly classes, and I don't teach a ton of weekly classes. I only teach a handful of like my own pre-registered classes these days. I genuinely love chatting with everybody who comes to class, whether it's before class or after class. And it's often the only chance that I have to connect with the folks who come to class. And when we get to have those little conversations, like that's what builds community. And I love hearing about, everybody's families and their pets and their work and what they've been up to that week. Like, I want to hear it all. And, sometimes like we clean up together and maybe a couple of people stay and they help me put away my little like battery operated candles and my twinkle lights. And like we chat after class and they help clean up. And like that feels so mutual and so nice. Or like if people don't mind chatting with me, like while I'm kind of tidying up the space, like I love that personally. And those conversations actually do fill my cup. But I think part of it is that like I don't teach a million classes a week. So I'm not having to do that like, 17 times a week because it might be different if that was the case. And also like everyone is just like so respectful. And I feel like my teaching expectations are really clear. And so I don't ever encounter those situations where people are like trauma dumping and, wanting me to be their therapist. Like it's never like that. It's always really, really good vibes. But like I mentioned previously, earlier in my teaching career, I did struggle a lot because students would latch on to me, especially in my first like year, 2 years of teaching yoga. And like they wanted to process their personal problems with me. And they were telling me about things that like I was just not prepared to, advise on, nor was it my place to do so. And like I would always feel really trapped in those conversations. Like I didn't know how to end them and I didn't know how to get out of them. And that can be really draining and it can drain your energy really fast. And I want to say that if you are like a brand new teacher, that you don't need to humor every like, I don't know, long story that someone wants to tell you or every, really intense share that somebody wants to bring to you. Like you can be super kind and compassionate and still have boundaries. And sometimes you might just say something like, I wish I had more time to chat with you, but I've really got to run off to the next thing. Or, I wish we could stay and talk about this, but I've got to set the alarm. I've got to lock up. Like you want to find a way to just really quickly and kindly communicate that like you care about them, but you're not open to extending this conversation any further. And like you've got somewhere to be and other things to do. And it's nice to be able to be like a listening ear for someone if you have the capacity for it. But we're not counselors as yoga teachers. And I think that protecting your energy at the end of the day is what is going to keep things sustainable for you. And it's what is going to allow you to teach yoga for a long time. And another thing that, is quite similar to this, but just in terms of kind of, managing like emotional boundaries as well, is that there are going to be times, especially if you run, I would say like yoga teacher trainings or retreats, where people might start to like be more vulnerable and share personal struggles or challenges with you. And I think the reason that those kind of vulnerable moments come up in those environments is because people are working on themselves, right? They're doing inner work. Things are naturally going to bubble up to the surface. And sometimes that happens and like we don't even expect it, right? Like that's often why there's, crying in yoga teacher trainings and stuff like that. It's like, because we're doing so much work on ourselves in such a short, intense period of time. Like we're bound to have emotions come up and memories come up to the surface. And so I think it's like the nature of those environments for people to share vulnerably. And it's not that, myself as a yoga teacher, like it's not that I'm ever like actively trying to make those things happen. And I'm certainly not an advocate for like group trauma bonding or trauma dumping or anything like that, like really not into it. But these kinds of things happen, right? And so you're going to have like difficult, sticky stuff come up for people in those kinds of environments. And as yoga teachers, like we're in charge of the energy that we bring into the room. We are also in charge of creating a space that is conducive to learning and a space that feels safe and suitable for everyone to learn. But we're not responsible for like being somebody's emotional support system because it's just not possible, right? Like you can't run a training and make sure that everybody is learning and you're delivering the curriculum properly and everyone's meeting their learning outcomes and counseling and like emotionally supporting everybody as they go through all of their stuff. And so one of the things that I've had to learn is that, you can be a really caring, compassionate teacher without absorbing everybody's story or feeling like you have to carry it home with you every day. And sometimes that means if somebody's really going through it, that like you're going to have to kindly redirect someone towards like more qualified support. Like maybe you redirect them to a counselor or a therapist or, a qualified health professional. And part of that is just because like our scope of practice as yoga teachers is super limited. Like we are not counselors and our scope of practice is there to protect us. It's there to protect our students and it's there to keep everyone safe. And even if somebody is like projecting the expectation onto you that you should give them emotional support and counsel them through their problems, like that is not your job, especially as a yoga teacher, okay? One more thing that really helps me manage my energy is having like a small little ritual that I like to do to kind of like close the energetic container after class. And these are just like little ways that I kind of signal to myself that like teaching is finished. Teacher Alex has like done her duty for the day or for the evening. And I get to be like just Alex after that. And, if I'm driving to teach, so like where I live here in Canada, like we have to drive everywhere pretty much because I'm not living like directly in a major metropolis. Everything's far away. So I always have to drive to go teach yoga. And if I'm driving to teach, I will often drive in silence just to get myself into a more kind of sattvic, like headspace, so that I can really be present with people. And I'm usually just thinking about like what I'm teaching that day, what my sequence is there, any meditation or pranayama that I want to share. Like I'm just kind of running through those things in my mind and just like being more introspective, not really taking on any more stimulation besides just the task of like driving, which is usually stimulating enough. Sometimes I will chant mantra like when I'm driving to teach. But then afterwards, when I'm driving home, that's where I have my little ritual to be like I said before, teaching is finished. I've done my job. And now I get to be like just Alex for the rest of the night. And so I love to blast like crazy music on my drive home. And typically, if it's music that would not be appropriate to play in a yoga class, that is the music that I will blast on my drive home. So maybe it's like rap or rock or hip hop, like usually something kind of high energy. And it's just like this personal little switch for me. And I don't know, it's just this fun little thing that I like to do. Lately, I've been listening to Kneecap on my drives home from yoga. I don't know if you know Kneecap, but they're like an Irish like hip hop group from Belfast, and they're like kind of controversial. Like I'm pretty sure they're banned from Canada right now. But yeah, if you want to know what I listen to after teaching yoga at like 10 o'clock at night, it's Kneecap. Yeah. Like teaching yoga, like totally fills me up more than like anything else. But I don't want to stay in that like deep meditative state that I feel after teaching and after like, holding space for Shavasana. Like I need to shift out of that after teaching so I can be part of the regular world. And so I feel like just playing like fun, loud music afterwards just kind of shifts my nervous system and like helps me transition back into my personal life. Yeah. So, if you take anything from today's episode, I would say that the amount of energy that we use and the amount of energy that it takes to hold space for other people as yoga teachers is something that is underestimated. And it's one of those things that yoga teacher training, as much as it tries to prepare us, you're just never going to be prepared until you actually go out and teach. And if you want your teaching life and teaching career to feel sustainable, I think that you've got to have some good energy management tools in your back pocket. And it does take time to learn them and figure out, what works for you. But what's cool about energy management and creating your own little rituals is you can tailor them to yourself and your own unique needs and preferences. And it can be something that's really fun. And so if you are teaching this week, and especially if you're a newer teacher, I really encourage you to notice what fills you up, what drains you, how do you feel when you show up to class, how do you feel when you leave class, and is there anywhere in your daily or weekly routine where maybe you need to infuse a little ritual or just a little something to make sure that you're taking care of you and to make sure that you are taking care of your own energy. All right, so I'll leave you with that. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening to Yoga Insider Podcast. If you've been enjoying the podcast, please make sure to rate and review the podcast wherever you're listening. It really helps boost the podcast in the algorithm so that more people see it when they're looking for yoga-related podcasts. And that's going to help more yoga teachers around the world benefit from these conversations. Thank you for being here. I'll see you next time.